bullying. So I think just in the games they would sometimes, oh, I'm playing with her today, you go away, but then tomorrow they might be playing with that other person. That's what kids do. There's a fine line between bullying and social isolation and just the way kids are. Especially boys. They'll just, oh, you're silly, you do such and such, but tomorrow you're my best friend. Boys sort of bounce back really quickly. They might say it in the heat of the moment, but it's their best friends tomorrow.
So do you think there could be any specific reason for this isolation in terms of people being different culturally or ability-wise, or?
Probably, but I think that is more at high school than primary school. Bullying in primary school was probably more physical, a punch, especially from boys, and especially if they came from a family where violence was prevalent. It's very difficult then to move into a different... Families one society, schools another, churches another, football's another, and there are different codes acceptable in all those areas. But we had to walk the line of mediator and teaching social norms to children, because if they see dad bashing mum, well, they think that happens in every house. Whereas we had to be specific and say you can't just walk up and punch somebody. Society does not accept that because you are causing somebody harm. And when they've grown up in a different way, not seeing dad hurt mum or dad even hurting them or mum, they think that's normal. So it's very difficult sometimes for teachers to turn that around. Same with swearing. Like at home, swearing can be a really normal thing, but at school it's not acceptable. Sometimes at football matches it is acceptable, but if you go to church it's totally unacceptable. There are different languages often for different areas. And little children do have to come to terms with that.
Right. So does your school have any programs to target the needs of minority groups like migrants, people coming from culturally different backgrounds, Indigenous students?
Yeah.
Did they have any programs?
Yes, we now have teachers who teach English as a second language because we have had more new Australians come, and of course the children have only spoken Afghani or whatever the language is from the country they came. So there are now specific teachers in schools that will come and work either in the classroom, in a corner with the child, or maybe withdraw the child completely and specifically teach English to them.
Right. So are there any programs for the students with disabilities?
Yes. During my years, probably the last 15 years of my career, more and more students that used to go to special schools started coming to our school. I can think of 3 children who had Down syndrome at specific times. Now, 2 boys were very low intellectually and 1 girl was quite good intellectually. So the boys did get teased and bullied, and the older boys would often ask them to pull their pants down, and of course these little boys did. Well, those kids all had to be got together and told, you don't do things like that, that is bullying, and there were specific actions taken for them. But the little girl, when she was young, it was fine in early years, but I can remember when she was in grade 6, I looked out my window and she was just sitting by herself, surrounded by her Barbie dolls. Now, the grade 6 girls would run by and say, "Oh, hi, so and so," and she'd say hi back, but she didn't have a best friend. The other girls had really outgrown her, and that was where I thought, what a shame she didn't go to a special school where there'd be probably at least one other person like her and she'd have a friend, which she now has, now that she's grown up and there have been special clubs and things she can go to. She has met like people with Down syndrome, and she has got a best friend, so it's lovely. And that's one thing against integration into main schools. Yes, it made other children aware that there were people like that in the world, but education-wise and social-wise, I do think they're probably better off in special school.
Special school. So how about any programs for Indigenous students? Did your school?
Well, not here, not so much in Tasmania, because although we did start teaching more about Tasmanian Aboriginal culture, yes, there is a specific program for that, but we would teach everybody, not just the Indigenous people.
So do you have any teaching strategies that has helped you to include these minority groups in the mainstream class?
Oh, yes. When you have a really special child, you get a certain amount of aid time, which means a person who's not a teacher but is an aide comes into the classroom for a certain amount of time and just works with that child. Now, you've got to remember, mostly I had 25 children, but often I would spend as much time just planning for that one child when he was working with his aide as I did for the rest of the class, because the rest of the class could be put in basically 3 groups for reading and maths, and I could withdraw those children at certain times and I could just teach that group while the others were doing other specific work. But this little one was so intellectually behind. He only had the mentality of a 2-year-old. Therefore, he could not often enter into what everybody else was doing. So again, I think he should have been in a special school where he could get the attention that he needed all the time.
All the time. So any different teaching strategy or individual education plan for the students from diverse backgrounds, like migrant kids and all?
If they weren't able to participate in the normal stream of things, I always did an individual education plan for them, yes.
As in, what used to be the goals of those plans?
Well, to raise their English, their math skills, their reading skills, the same as all the other children, but of course they were starting at a lower level because the English wasn't their first language at home.
Okay, so your goal to develop these strategies and education plan, what was it targeted at?
Well, to try to bring them up to the level of basic grade 3 or 4, whatever class they were in. But I may not get there by the end of the year, but hopefully the next teacher will be able to then bring them up, because mostly they were capable as any other child in the class, but it was just they were held back by the language.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that ends.
Oh,